The first time I heard Mara Chin's name again, I was kneeling on the bathroom floor with one hand inside a diaper bag and the other pinning my hair back with a broken clip. My daughter had decided that gravity was a personal enemy and launched half a jar of pureed pumpkin onto my shirt, my pants, and my optimism. I wiped her cheeks, humming nonsense, and tried to pretend the mirror above the sink belonged to someone else. Then Ethan walked past the doorway, phone at his ear, and said the name in a careful voice I had not heard in years. "Yes," he said. "Mara's back in Harbor City." I froze with a wipe in my hand. My daughter giggled as if my stillness were a game. The silence in my body was not a game. Mara Chin had once loved my husband the way a tide loves the shore. Relentless, public, and certain it would eventually win. She had followed him through graduate school openings, museum openings, and one disastrous fundraiser where she donated a photograph titled, "The Man Who Won't Look Back." Ethan had never looked back. He had looked at me, and I had mistaken the suddenness of that gaze for fate. We had been married 3 years now. I was 31, and my calendar was a mosaic of nap windows, pediatric appointments, and meal prep lists that existed to soothe Ethan's mother. I had gained weight after pregnancy in the slow, unglamorous way that comes from living on cold leftovers and anxiety. I used to be the woman who ran a team at a brand agency, the kind who could walk into a boardroom with a messy bun and still be taken seriously. Now I was Jolie, the wife, the mother, the one who stayed home so Ethan could be brilliant without interruption. That was how everyone told the story. It sounded noble when they said it, and it sounded like a joke when I tried to say it to myself. That night, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks in front of the foyer mirror and asked, with polite habit, "Do you want to come to Quinn's dinner?" His tone suggested the question was a checkbox, not an invitation. Quinn Xue was Ethan's closest friend and the chairman who kept the museum's donors gentle. Quinn also enjoyed reminding me that Mara had been around longer. I should have said no. I should have said my daughter was teething, or my stomach hurt, or I had no clean dress. Instead, the word that came out of my mouth surprised even me. "Yes," I said. "I'll come." Ethan blinked as if the script had changed mid-scene, then nodded and said he would wait downstairs. I stared at my closet, at the dresses that no longer closed, at the fabric that clung and highlighted everything I wished I could erase. I chose a loose blazer and wide-leg pants, the uniform of a woman trying to look like she still belonged to a world that didn't smell like baby lotion. When I stepped into the elevator, my daughter's tiny fingers grabbed my necklace like an anchor. I kissed her forehead and told myself I was going to dinner, not war. Quinn had reserved a private room at a restaurant designed to look like a greenhouse. Warm lights hung like captured fireflies. Expensive people laughed too loudly. The moment Ethan and I walked in, the conversation stumbled. I felt eyes slide over me the way hands test fruit for bruises. In the middle of the table, Mara sat with a glass of red wine, hair swept to one side, cheekbones sharp enough to cut memory. She wore black leather-like armor and smiled like she was already winning. "Ethan Liu," she said brightly, voice clear above the quiet. "Long time." Ethan's face held his museum smile, gentle and controlled. He slipped an arm around my shoulders, the gesture of a man demonstrating his property. "Mara," he replied. "Welcome back." Mara's gaze landed on me as if she were calibrating focus. "And this is?" Quinn answered before Ethan could. "The wife," he said, as if he were introducing a chair. "Jolie May." Mara tilted her head. "Ah," she said softly, then raised her glass. "Nice to meet you." Her lips curved, but her eyes reddened slightly, as if tears were a decorative accessory she could put on and take off at will. "Sorry," she added. "I didn't recognize you at first." A few people chuckled. I smiled, polite and small, because women like me are trained to survive by shrinking. Dinner rolled forward with the inevitability of a storm. People asked Mara about her awards, her travel, her new exhibit proposals. She talked about deserts where the air tasted like metal and villages where children ran barefoot beside trucks. Every sentence sounded like proof of life. Every person leaned in, hungry for her charisma. I looked at my plate and tried to keep my breathing even. When Mara described a night she had photographed lightning behind a refugee camp, Ethan's eyes softened the way they did when he watched documentaries. "It seems you didn't waste your years," he said slowly. Mara's smile warmed. "I didn't," she answered, and the two words hung between them like a private promise. Quinn laughed and said, "To be fair, Mara's always been the type to turn rejection into a trophy." Someone else, tipsy and brave, added, I heard she never dated anyone else. Still waiting for the right man. The table stiffened. Ethan's voice cut through it, sharp for the first time all evening. Don't say nonsense. Laughter returned in smaller waves, but my mind stayed on the balcony I knew would happen later. The balcony where men pretend they are discussing business while they confess their hearts. I excused myself to the restroom, partly because my throat felt tight, and partly because I needed a moment where no one could measure my body against Mara's. The mirror above the sink reflected a woman with tired eyes and a smile practiced into place like makeup. My blazer pulled at the seams. My cheeks looked rounder than I remembered. I washed my hands for too long, listening to the muted laughter behind the door. When I returned, I caught Ethan staring at Mara across the table. It wasn't a hungry stare. It was worse. It was a stare full of history, the kind that makes the present feel temporary. Mara noticed and let her jacket slide off her shoulders, revealing a thin necklace that caught the light and threw it back like a dare. For a second, I thought the pendant looked familiar. My stomach dropped when I realized why. 2 days earlier, Ethan had bought me diamond studs to cheer me up, and the stones on Mara's necklace matched them. The same cut, the same brand, the same subtle cruelty of coincidence. Later, as predicted, I walked past the balcony and heard men's voices like smoke. Ethan, someone said, be honest. Ever regret being so cold to her? Ethan replied calmly, the colder I was, the better it was for her. If I had given her hope, she would have wasted her life. Now she's exceptional. That's enough, Quinn snorted. And your wife? He asked. She's watching you like a hawk tonight. Didn't know she could leave the baby. Another man laughed. If she caught you cheating, she'd probably throw a tantrum. Their laughter was low and confident, the laughter of men who assume women exist as reactions. Ethan didn't laugh, but he didn't stop them either. The word wife tasted bitter in my mouth. I turned away before they could see me, because I understood something ugly. My marriage was a room where people felt safe making jokes about my pain. When we got home, Ethan's mother, Madame Lou, was in the living room with my daughter on her hip, her lips pressed into a line the moment she saw me. You're a mother now, she said before I could even take my shoes off. A child needs routine. Don't drag her out and back this late. My sister-in-law, Lena, sprawled on the couch like a decorative threat, scrolling her phone. Without looking up, she said, that blazer is struggling. You look huge. I swallowed the retort that rose like bile. My daughter reached for me, crying the moment she saw my face, and I carried her upstairs to nurse and soothe her, letting the warm weight of her body remind me that not everything in my life was shallow. At midnight, my stomach pain woke me, sharp and familiar, the kind that comes from months of eating too fast and too much and too late. I reached for Ethan, but the bed beside me was empty. The balcony door was open, and cigarette smoke drifted in like a ghost. Ethan stood outside with his back to me, phone in his hand, the ember of his cigarette pulsing. He looked like a man staring at an ocean he wasn't allowed to swim in. I didn't ask who he was talking to. I didn't need to. I went back to bed and listened to my daughter's breathing until my own heartbeat stopped racing. Days passed in the same loop. Diapers, dishes, Madame Lou's rules, Lena's comments, Ethan's absences, disguised as work. Then Ethan mentioned, casually, that the museum would host a major exhibit of Mara's photographs. It's a big opportunity, he said. Every institution wants her. I heard the subtext, I want her. When I questioned why it had to be Mara, Ethan's patience snapped. Jolie, he said, this is work. When did you become the kind of woman who imagines shadows everywhere? I opened my mouth and realized I had no vocabulary left for my own feelings. The words came out wrong, weak and desperate. Ethan's eyes hardened. You have everything, he continued. My mother helps. Lena helps. The nanny cooks. All you do is be with the baby. Isn't that the happiest thing? I looked at the floor and answered quietly. It's happiness without joy. Ethan didn't hear the difference, or he didn't care. 2 days after that argument, Ethan transferred money to my parents and placed diamond earrings on my bedside table, as if they could buy back tenderness. He kissed my forehead and whispered, be tolerant, okay? The person who lives with you for life is me. My mother called and said I was blessed, that I had married well, that I must never let a man like Ethan slip away. Neighbors praised me as if survival were success. I smiled, nodded, and then ate until I felt sick because numbness tastes like sugar and salt. The breaking point arrived in a mall, the most ordinary battlefield. I was pushing my daughter's stroller past a stage where the museum was holding a press preview. Cameras flashed. Mara sat beside Ethan on a modern couch, their knees angled toward each other like magnets. The interviewer asked for a memorable moment. Mara laughed and told a story about planning to enter a conflict zone and receiving a message from someone telling her to take care of herself. She implied the message saved her life. Applause erupted. Ethan, when it was his turn, paused and said, "The night before the wedding." People laughed as if it were a romantic joke. Mara looked at him as if he had finally admitted a secret. My lungs tightened. I backed away before anyone could see me, and in doing so, bumped straight into Quinn. He blocked my path with a grin. "You came," he said. "Why not go say hi?" His tone was playful, but his eyes were cruel. "It must be hard seeing them together," he added. "They look like they were designed for each other." I felt tears press against my eyes. Quinn's grin faltered. "Are you crying?" he asked, surprised, as if women were supposed to leak only on schedule. I wiped my cheek and lied. Something flew into my eye. I pushed the stroller past him and walked out into air that tasted like shame. That night, Ethan came home smelling like alcohol. When he leaned in to kiss me, I turned my face away and saw a raw scrape on his upper lip. "What happened?" I asked. Ethan's jaw clenched. "I bit myself," he said. When I asked what kind of dinner required biting lips, his voice turned cold. "I'm exhausted. I don't have energy to entertain your suspicion. Sleep in the living room if you want to interrogate me." I stared at him, then said, calmly, "You sleep in the living room." He stared back like he couldn't process resistance. Then he said, softly and viciously, "Honestly, touching you like this takes effort now." He left and slammed the door. I sat on the bed and opened my phone. Mara was live streaming, cheeks flushed, laughing into the camera like she owned the night. Comments flew, asking if she was in love. Mara smiled and said she wasn't, but her wish had finally come true. Someone asked the wildest thing she'd ever done. Mara, drunk and fearless, said, "The night before a big day for the man I liked, I gave him everything." The chat exploded. Mara traced her lipstick with a finger and murmured, "He chose someone else then. But today he showed me he regrets it." My hand tightened around the phone until my fingers hurt. Then Madame Lou's aide knocked and pushed a steaming bowl into my room. "Fish soup," she said. "Madame says you must drink it." The smell made my stomach twist. I looked at the aide and said gently, "No." The aide frowned. "If you don't, I'll report you." I smiled, still gentle. "Go ahead," I said. "And while you're reporting, ask Madame where her missing gold bangle went. I saw you put it in your bag last week." The aide's face drained of color. She left quietly, closing the door with care for the first time. I sat in the silence and realized I had just spoken like a woman who was no longer asking for permission. The next morning, Madame Lou waited at the dining table with her arms crossed. Ethan and Lena were out. It was the perfect time for her to remind me I was worthless. She did. She listed my failures like she was reading a grocery receipt. She said I should be grateful. She said she could have chosen a better daughter-in-law. She said she wished she could follow her late husband and leave this world rather than live with my ingratitude. I listened until the sentence ended. Then I set my daughter on the playmat and looked at Madame Lou with calm clarity. "Then go," I said. Madame Lou blinked. "What did you say?" I repeated it slowly. "Go. If you want to die, go." Her face twisted. She lunged, hand raised. At the last second, I screamed, fell backward onto the rug, and clutched my head, crying like a wounded actress. Madame Lou froze, then whirled on the aide who had witnessed everything. "You saw, right?" she demanded. I didn't touch her. The aide's eyes flicked to my face, then away. "Madame," she said quietly, "you hit her." Madame Lou looked as if the world had betrayed her. I kept crying until my throat hurt, then stopped with perfect timing, the way women learn to do when they finally decide to become the author of the scene. Ethan returned to find me in bed with a bandage wrapped around my head, skin pale, eyes wet. A doctor's note on the nightstand described a concussion and advised, "No stress." The aide sighed dramatically and said Madame Lou had lost control because I came home late. Ethan's face went hard with anger, but not at me. For the first time, his anger pointed at his mother. He went downstairs, and I heard raised voices. Ethan insisting I could not have fabricated it. Madame Lou screaming that I was a snake. I closed my eyes and let the sound become background music for a plan. When Ethan came back, He held my hand and apologized for his mother. His eyes were full of guilt, the kind of guilt that can be used like currency. I spent it immediately. "Ethan," I whispered, "I'm scared of her. Can Anya and I stay somewhere else for a while?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "It's unfair to you," he murmured. "But yes, I'll arrange it." The apartment Ethan rented was not luxurious, but it was clean. It had 2 bedrooms and windows that let in honest light. The first night there, after I put my daughter to sleep, I lit a small candle on a convenience store cupcake and whispered, "Happy birthday, Jolie." Nobody answered. The quiet did not feel lonely. It felt like oxygen. I turned my loneliness into schedule. I cooked simple meals. I walked with the stroller every morning, not for aesthetics, but to prove to my lungs that I was not trapped. I studied during naps. I had decided to take the civil service exam, not because government work was glamorous, but because stability was a ladder, and I needed a ladder. I also decided to lose weight, not because being smaller would make me more lovable, but because my body had become a storage unit for grief. Each kilogram I lost felt like throwing away a box of someone else's expectations. Ethan visited at first, bringing fruit and apologies, staying 10 minutes like he was paying a fine. When I refused to sleep with him, his visits thinned. His tone grew colder. He wanted the old version of me back, the one who begged. I didn't beg. I smiled, thanked him, and returned to my books. At the end of the first month, I had lost 6 kilograms. I sent no announcements. I simply bought a new bra and felt my ribs return like friends. Mara's life remained public. She posted dinners, champagne, sunsets. I watched not because I wanted to suffer, but because I needed evidence. In divorce courts, truth is not felt, it is documented. One photo showed Mara clinking glasses with a man whose cufflinks I recognized because I had purchased them for Ethan during our engagement. My hands did not shake this time. I saved the image and moved on to the next practice essay. When my daughter turned 2, I called Ethan and asked him to come for her cake. He promised he would. He didn't show. An hour after midnight, I saw fireworks on Mara's feed and a blurry photo of a man carrying her on a beach. Even blurred, I knew Ethan's shoulders. Mara captioned it, "Wish number 1. Fulfilled." I closed the app and opened another exam simulation. The sound of my pencil against paper felt steadier than my marriage ever had. 2 months in, my face looked sharper. 3 months in, my clothes fit differently. I bought a silver dress I used to be afraid of and tried it on. My body was no longer the place where other people's words sat comfortably. When Quinn announced a blessing banquet at a hotel and demanded everyone attend, Ethan called me to say I shouldn't come. "It will be embarrassing," he said, impatient. "And what about Anya?" I told him I had hired a daytime sitter. Ethan scoffed. "Busy with what?" he asked. "Besides the baby." I did not answer. I simply said, "I'm coming," and ended the call. At the banquet, I walked in wearing a fitted silver cheongsam that made people forget how to breathe. The room turned, heads swiveling, conversations collapsing into silence. I watched Ethan's eyes widen as if he were seeing me for the first time. Mara, draped in black, stared at me with an expression that briefly cracked. Ethan rushed toward me with a delighted confusion. "Jolie," he said, "you look." I raised a hand, not touching him, and looked past him to Quinn. "Chairman Shue," I said sweetly, "could you introduce me to the fortune master?" Quinn, amused and intrigued, offered his arm. I took it. Ethan's smile faltered, as if someone had taken away his toy. Mara's mouth tightened. I let them watch me walk away. The fortune master gave me a paper charm and said my studies would go well. I thanked him, because in my life, belief was less important than motivation. In the hallway, Ethan waited and asked if I had prayed for him and our daughter. I smiled. "I prayed for myself," I answered. His face darkened, but he forced a laugh. "You're acting strange lately," he said, "like you're someone else." I tilted my head. "People change," I replied. "You did too." As I was leaving, I heard Mara arguing with Quinn in a side corridor. "Why are you helping her?" Mara hissed. Quinn's voice went cold. "Touch your chest and ask yourself if I've never helped you," he said. "That award you brag about? I paid to bury the photos that would have ruined you. Don't mistake my money for my loyalty." Mara fell silent. I walked on, feeling a strange clarity. Mara's brilliance had scaffolding, and Ethan's devotion had conditions. I had been living in a house of borrowed stability. That night, Quinn offered to drive me home in his sports car. Ethan tried to refuse for me, but I opened the door and sat down. Quinn drove quietly, surprising me with his restraint. I fell asleep from exhaustion, and when I woke, we were parked outside my apartment. Quinn stared at the road like he was seeing a different life. "Sometimes the worst thing is the start of the best thing," he said softly. I nodded because I didn't want to argue with a man who was, for once, right. Mara posted a video 2 days later. Rose petals, dim hotel light, shadows moving behind a curtain. The caption suggested an old wind had finally been satisfied. I watched it without crying. I opened my phone's notes app and wrote a checklist. Lawyer consult, financial records, custody plan, living arrangements, evidence backups. I had not become hard. I had become organized. Ethan began sending photos of his hotel room when he traveled, as if proof could replace trust. I posted a few of his photos on my social media with a caption that sounded innocent. "My husband's business trip room. Can you tell if he's alone?" The comment section detonated. People noticed the second glass on the table, the women's cigarette brand, the flower sticker on a camera. Strangers became detectives. Rumors became waves. I didn't respond. I let the river run. Ethan came home early, furious and pale, not because he felt guilty, but because he felt exposed. At the same time, Madame Lou and Lena exploded into a family war over property. Madame Lou had quietly transferred most assets into Ethan's name years earlier. Lena, who had assumed she would inherit the best apartment, threatened lawsuits, and brought her boyfriend, an actual thug, to scream in the museum lobby. With Mara's exhibition opening soon, donors panicked. Ethan made a choice under pressure. He agreed to sell the family penthouse and split the proceeds with Lena to shut her up. Lena took the money and flew overseas the next day. Madame Lou was hospitalized with chest pains. Ethan moved into my small apartment, claiming we needed to be a family while chaos raged. I gave him a spare room and told him to sleep there so our daughter wouldn't be disturbed. Ethan mistook my calm for forgiveness. "After the exhibition," he promised, eyes earnest, "we'll buy a new house. We'll live better. Everything will improve." The morning Ethan said that, I checked my email and saw the public list of exam results. My candidate number was there, highlighted by accident of font and fate. I stared at it until my vision blurred, then inhaled and smiled at Ethan as he talked about furniture. "Yes," I said softly, "my life will improve." Mara's exhibition opened with applause loud enough to drown lies. Ethan and Mara walked through the crowd like a couple in wedding photos, holding champagne, smiling for cameras. In the celebration after, Mara cornered me with a glass of wine and a satisfied grin. "It feels good," she said, voice thick with victory, "to finally slap someone without using my hand." I laughed, not bitterly, but genuinely amused. Mara blinked, confused. "You still don't understand," she said. "Your happy life is already collapsing." I looked at her and asked calmly, "Are you talking about the fact that you finally slept with my husband?" Mara's glass froze halfway to her lips. Her face reddened. She tried to recover with a smirk. "You're recording," she accused. I shrugged. "Audio can be edited," I said. "It's a boring weapon." Mara narrowed her eyes, uneasy. "So you'll tolerate it?" she demanded. "Women like you cling even when they see the bed." I smiled. "Divorce is simple," I replied, "but timing is strategy." At that moment, Ethan approached, arms sliding around my shoulders again, possessive and performative. Mara, desperate, asked him loudly whether we had truly bought a new house together. Ethan answered, "Yes," without looking at her. He then told me, gently, that we should move out with his mother later, that we needed a private life. The irony was almost elegant. I waited until he finished speaking, then lifted my chin and said in a clear voice that carried across the nearest cluster of donors, "Ethan Lou, I want a divorce." The room paused. It wasn't silence. It was attention. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. "These are papers already signed by me," I said calmly. "The terms follow the law. Review them." I extended the folder. Ethan stared at it as if it were a foreign object. Quinn stepped in and took it from my hand with a small bow, like a gentleman receiving a death sentence. "Thank you," I told him politely, and then I walked away from the party as if I were leaving a restaurant where the meal had simply ended. I didn't look back at Ethan's face. I didn't need to. The detail that day was the smell of rain. I had lived with that face for years and knew every expression it could perform: shock, anger, wounded pride, disbelief, and finally, when the room's lights made him feel trapped, regret. I thought my story ended there. But men like Ethan always believe they deserve an epilogue. He showed up at my apartment the next day with flowers and that familiar, gentle voice. I told him he could speak to my lawyer. He stood in the doorway and said, "Jolie, I love you." I nodded. "I know," I answered. "You love me the way you love a painting you bought early. You like the idea that it belongs to your timeline." Ethan flinched. He wanted me to be wrong. He wanted my words to be emotional, not accurate. I closed the door and went back to my daughter, who was building a tower of blocks and laughing every time it fell. Because children understand something. Adults forget. Collapse is not always tragedy. Sometimes it is practice. Months later, my government appointment letter arrived. It was plain and official and more romantic than anything Ethan had ever given me. I moved again, this time by my own choice, into a small apartment near a park where my daughter could run. I hung my civil service badge on the wall like a medal. I slept without cigarette smoke in my lungs. I ate slowly. I cried once, unexpectedly, while cutting apples, because freedom can be heavy when you first hold it. Then I wiped my face and kept cutting. Ethan tried to call. Sometimes he texted apologies with the same structure as donor emails. Mara vanished from the headlines after a scandal about staged photographs began to circle, and Quinn quietly withdrew his protection. Madame Lou attempted to visit my daughter and was met at the door by my lawyer's calm refusal. Lena returned briefly to demand more money and was refused by Ethan, who finally understood what it felt like to be used. None of their dramas belonged to me anymore. On my daughter's 3rd birthday, I baked a cake that leaned slightly to the right, imperfect and proud. My friends from the exam study group came over, loud and kind. When my daughter blew out the candles, she didn't wish for a father to come home. She wished for a bigger balloon. I laughed until my stomach hurt. People asked me later if I regretted marrying Ethan, if I regretted losing to Mara. I told them the truth. I didn't lose. I exited a game I never agreed to play. I stopped competing for a man who treated devotion like an entitlement. I stopped begging to be seen by people who liked me best when I was quiet. If that was loss, then loss was the most generous teacher I had ever met. There is a photo from that night, taken by a friend, of me holding my daughter while she smears frosting on my cheek. My hair is tied up with a simple clip, not broken this time. In the background, the city lights glitter, without caring who is faithful. I look at the camera and smile in a way I used to envy in other women. A smile that says, I am not waiting for anyone to choose me. I already did. After I moved out, I learned that quiet is not the absence of conflict. It is the space where your own thoughts finally have room to speak. I created rules for my new life, like I was drafting a contract. No answering messages after 10, no skipping breakfast, no apologizing for taking up space. The first rule I broke was sleep, because my mind had been starved and now refused to stop chewing. I bought used textbooks from a student marketplace and spread them across the dining table, turning the apartment into a small private library. During my daughter's naps, I practiced logic questions and wrote essay outlines in pen until my handwriting returned to the confident slope it had before motherhood. When panic showed up, it arrived in disguised forms. A craving for late-night pastries, an urge to scroll through Mara's photos, a sudden need to reorganize the pantry, as if order in spices could create order in love. Every time that happened, I chose a different action. I drank water. I did 10 minutes of stretching. I called a friend who didn't treat my marriage like entertainment. I kept a note above the sink that said, "Evidence is kindness to your future self," and it reminded me why I saved screenshots instead of saving feelings. I stopped wearing clothes that begged for forgiveness and started wearing clothes that simply fit. I learned to cook meals that tasted good without becoming punishment, because I wasn't trying to shrink into virtue anymore. On days when Madame Lou's voice echoed in my head, I turned the echo into a mock debate and wrote counter-arguments on paper like a student, because cruelty loses power when it is forced to meet structure. The sitter I hired was an older woman who loved telling my daughter stories. She never once told me I was lucky to have a husband, and that alone felt like therapy. One afternoon she said, casually, "You look lighter," and I realized she meant my shoulders, not my waist. That night I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watched the traffic crawl like glowing insects, and understood that my life had not ended. It had simply switched authors. The first time I signed my name on a legal form without Ethan's surname next to it, My hand steadied as if it had been waiting for that motion. I learned that confidence is not a mood but a method, built from decisions you keep even when nobody applauds. Some evenings my daughter fell asleep with her toy rabbit on my shoulder, and the warmth felt like a reason to keep going. When I passed the bakery window and smelled butter and sugar, I did not think of comfort. I thought of boundaries. A woman at the park asked if my husband was busy at work, and I answered, truthfully, that my husband was busy being irrelevant. In my study notes, I wrote one line in bold: do not negotiate with a life that makes you smaller. The more I practiced saying no, the less dramatic it sounded, until no became an ordinary tool like a key. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never arrive in the language I needed. Every kilogram I lost was not a prize. It was a receipt for effort I had been spending on the wrong things. I began to recognize my own laughter again, and it startled me every time, like a bird returning to a balcony it once abandoned. After the banquet, my life stopped being a private ache and became a sequence of practical steps. I met a lawyer in a small office above a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and heat, and the lawyer did not ask me whether I still loved Ethan. She asked me which bank accounts existed, which assets were jointly owned, who paid for the daycare, and whether I had any evidence that could survive a judge's boredom. That question was a gift. Love is messy, paperwork is clean. I brought screenshots, photos, receipts, and a notebook where I had written dates the way you write a medical chart. The lawyer nodded, circled 3 items, and said we would file for divorce and request temporary custody with a stable schedule. She explained that the court would not care about romance, only routines. I went home and stared at my daughter sleeping with her fingers curled like commas, and I understood that I had been building routines my entire marriage while Ethan was building excuses. I could outlast him. The first hearing was not dramatic. It was fluorescent lights, stiff chairs, and people pretending they were not frightened. Ethan arrived in a suit that cost more than my monthly groceries and looked offended that the world had turned him into a defendant. He whispered my name like it was a password. I kept my eyes on the clerk's desk. When the judge asked whether we could attempt mediation, I agreed, because agreeing gave me time. In the mediation room, Ethan tried the same strategy he used on donors: warmth, regret, promises, and a careful smile. He said he had been under pressure. He said Mara meant nothing. He said he wanted our family intact. I asked one question and held my voice steady. If you wanted our family intact, why did you keep making choices that cracked it? Ethan blinked, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he had never needed to say it aloud. When he shifted to anger, the mediator watched him differently, and that was the point. Madame Lou attempted to enter the process as if she were the real spouse. She demanded grandparent rights with the certainty of someone who thought motherhood was ownership. My lawyer responded with calm boundaries and one cold sentence: the child's best interest is not the same as the family's pride. Ethan's sister tried to frighten me by sending messages about lawyers and connections. I saved them. People underestimate mothers who learn to document. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking safety. While the paperwork moved, I studied. I had always been good at focused work, and now focus felt like rescue. During naps, I practiced essays. After bedtime, I memorized policy outlines. On weekends, I pushed the stroller to the library and read until my eyes burned. Not because I wanted applause, but because I wanted a door that only I could unlock. There were nights I wanted to collapse, and on those nights I made tea, folded laundry, and chose the smallest next action instead of the loudest emotion. Ethan's messages changed as my replies stayed short. He went from pleading to accusing, then to pretending he didn't care. Each phase arrived on schedule, like a predictable storm. Mara tried to win the narrative online, posting photos that implied luxury and devotion. Then a photographer's assistant leaked a thread about staged shots and manipulated captions. The public turned quickly, because the public always wants to believe it can spot a fraud. Quinn withdrew his sponsorship quietly, and Mara's bright life dimmed in real time. She sent Ethan a message, then deleted it. She posted a sad quote about loneliness. I felt nothing. Her jealousy had never been about me as a person. It had been about proving she could take what I had. The court granted temporary custody to me with a visitation schedule for Ethan. He arrived for the first handoff holding toys and guilt, trying to perform fatherhood as if it were a presentation. My daughter accepted the toys and then ran back to me, because children understand consistency better than speeches. Ethan's face tightened, then softened, then tightened again. I almost pitied him, but pity is a trap. Instead, I kept the schedule, because schedules protect children. When the exam results were posted, my candidate number appeared like a lighthouse. I sat on the floor and laughed until my cheeks hurt, then cried once, quietly, because it was the first time in years my tears were not begging for someone else. I called my study group, and they screamed into the phone like we had won a war. My daughter clapped because she liked noise. I framed the acceptance letter when it arrived, not because paper changes your worth, but because paper can remind you of your own effort when memory gets mean. The day I started my new job, I wore a simple white blouse and walked into the building with my shoulders back. Nobody there knew Ethan or Mara. Nobody cared about museum dinners. They cared whether I could do the work. I could. In the months that followed, I learned that peace is built, not found. I paid bills from my own income. I saved a little each month. I bought my daughter new shoes without asking anyone's permission. I met other parents at the park and spoke to them like equals. I stopped checking Ethan's social media. I stopped rehearsing conversations I would never have. The final divorce decree arrived on an ordinary morning. I signed, the lawyer stamped, and the world did not collapse. In the evening, I made noodles, cut fruit, and watched my daughter fall asleep with a sticky smile. I realized that the dramatic ending I once feared was only a change of address. Ethan continued to ask for chances in different tones, and I continued to answer with the same calm boundary. Speak to the lawyer, follow the schedule, be a father in practice, not in performance. He tried, sometimes. He failed, often. But his success or failure was no longer my identity. On my birthday, my friends brought a lopsided cake and sang loudly and terribly. I blew out the candle and wished for something unglamorous. Steady health, steady work, and steady love that does not require me to shrink. When my daughter asked why we didn't live with Grandma anymore, I told her, because our home is where we are safe. She nodded and accepted it, because children trust the truth when you give it to them gently. I used to think my life was decided by who chose me. Now I understood my life was decided by what I chose, and kept choosing, even on days when nobody was watching. Spring arrived without asking my permission. Trees outside the apartment bloomed as if nothing had ever been broken, and my daughter decided the word again was the funniest word in the world. She used it for everything. Cookie again, park again, song again, a chant that turned time into something optimistic. I studied in the mornings and worked part-time in the afternoons, building savings the way you stack stones. Slowly, carefully, accepting that one reckless move ruins the pile. I stopped chasing dramatic closures and started chasing small wins. I replaced my old wardrobe one item at a time. Not to seduce anyone, but to stop wearing fabrics that reminded me of begging. I took my daughter to a children's library program and made a friend named Sora, a single mother with laugh lines and no patience for nonsense. She didn't ask for my sad backstory. She asked if I wanted coffee. We built a routine. After the library, coffee for us, milk for the toddlers, and 10 minutes of adult conversation before the next tantrum. Those 10 minutes were medicine. Ethan called once during that period, voice soft, and asked if we could start over. I told him he could start over with himself. I was not a reset button for his guilt. He tried to sound offended, then tried to sound wounded, then finally tried to sound angry. I let him cycle through the emotions like a weather report and ended the call. When the exam results were published, I checked them alone in my kitchen, hands steady around my phone. My candidate number appeared on the list, and I felt a clean shock run through my body, the kind that turns into laughter before it becomes tears. I didn't run to tell Ethan. I texted Sora, then I texted my lawyer, then I opened a cabinet and found the cheapest sparkling drink I could afford. My daughter clapped because she thought clapping was required when adults smile. I poured 2 cups anyway, one for me and one for the future. On my first day at the district office, I wore a simple blouse and a badge with my name printed clearly. The office wasn't glamorous. The chairs squeaked. The air conditioning was too cold. The work was steady and honest. Files, forms, people who needed help and didn't know where to begin. My supervisor asked if I could handle difficult citizens. I said yes, because I had lived with difficult people for years. The first time I processed a request that helped someone get childcare assistance, I walked home feeling taller than I had felt in ages. That night, while my daughter slept, I looked at my reflection and realized the difference wasn't my weight or my dress or my hair. The difference was that my eyes no longer searched the room for approval. They searched for the next action. Mara's name drifted into the news once, tied to accusations that a photograph had been staged for sympathy. The museum issued a cautious statement, Quinn's support evaporated. Ethan's donors grew nervous. I watched the headlines without satisfaction. I didn't need her downfall to validate my rise. Ethan sent a final message, longer than any message he had sent while we were married, full of regret and the word